This podcast is part one in a two-part series on battery technology and impact on national security.
Hello, and welcome to the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center podcast. The HDIAC, as it is known, is one of three Defense Technical Information Center basic centers of operations. And these centers cover a wide variety of technical areas that are important to the Department of Defense. They provide users with focused, expert technical consulting and unbiased scientific and technical information through in-depth analysis and product creation. Today, to better understand how the technical and operational aspects of Homeland Security and Defense blend into the global environment, today's podcast will discuss battery technology and the impact on national security and how this relates to trends in climate change. I'm Ambassador Richard Koslerich, co-director of the Center for Energy Science and Policy at George Mason Schar School. And joining me are Dr. David Hart, who's director of the Center of Science, Technology, and Innovation and professor at the Schar School of Policy and Government, and Dr. Dorothy Robyn, who is from Boston University's Institute for Sustainable Energy. David Hart is a professor at the Schar School and a senior fellow at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Among Professor Hart's research has been a focus on clean energy innovation policy. His recent work at the Innovation Foundation has included a piece on the Global Energy Innovation Index, national contributions to the Global Clean Energy Innovation System. Another article on making beyond lithium a reality, fostering innovation in long-duration grid storage, and also a piece with the MIT Innovation Center.
MIT Energy Initiative.
Got that right now. On energy storage for the grid, policy options for sustaining innovation. Professor Hart served as Senior Associate Dean here at the Schar School from 2013 to 2015. He was an Assistant Director for Innovation Policy at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from 2011 to 2012, and he co-chairs the Innovation Policy Forum at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. Dr. Robyn is a public policy expert who writes and consults on issues relating to energy, transportation, and telecommunications. She's a non-resident senior fellow at Boston University's Institute for Sustainable Energy. And from 2009 to 2014, she served in the Obama administration, first as Deputy Undersecretary in the Department of Defense with overall management responsibility for U.S. military bases and related energy and environmental issues, and later as head of the U.S. General Services Administration's Public Buildings Service. From 1993 to 2001, she was on the staff of the White House National Economic Council, where she coordinated issues relating to aviation, defense and aerospace, telecommunications, and science and technology policy. She's also been a principal with the Brattle Group, an economic consultancy where she focused on aviation and telecommunications, an assistant professor at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and a guest scholar at the Brookings Institution. She currently serves on two standing National Academy of Science boards on energy and infrastructure, respectively, and on the World Resources Institute's Global Leadership Council. She has an MPP and a PhD in public policy from the University of California at Berkeley, and is author of two books, and probably numerous articles. So, really pleased to have you with us today. And you know, it's one of these topics that seems to get a lot of media attention, but just provides enough information to make you realize there's a lot going on that really requires more detailed explanation. All of these new battery technologies leading to distributed energy systems and new generation of energy storage. Revolutionary is a word that you often see in the media, a change in how to produce, use, deliver, and store energy. Part of this is driven by by climate change, but also there are civilian and military applications that are also driving this. And there's the question of the national security implications of battery supply chain questions. So a big agenda, but why don't I turn it over to you, David, if you'd like to start, and Dorothy follow on that with kind of a general sense of where you see these issues headed.
Sure. So I think the big driving force, as you mentioned, is climate. It's driving policy around the world. And there's going to be, if we succeed in slowing the pace of climate change, we'll have a very different looking energy system in 2050, which is the target date that most people talk about. But at the same time, there are technological opportunities that are being created, partly independent of that, but partly driven by R&D that's motivated by climate. And one of the biggest trends in that whole process is the decentralization, particularly of electricity and energy storage. And I want to broaden the conversation a little bit beyond batteries, so we can talk about the technologies. But energy storage creates a lot of options for systems development in electricity that weren't available before. We can see it, at the consumer level with solar panels on people's roofs, but that's really just scratching the surface. So we're moving from a world in which really the electricity supply is dominated by very large power plants to one in which there will still be large power plants, but there will also be all kinds of other resources that have to be integrated together. And that's the big challenge facing the electricity system.
So for the Department of Defense, batteries, energy storage, energy technology generally, but batteries and energy storage are extremely important. By and large, not because of climate issues, but because of warfighter requirements. Although I think DoD can contribute to the campaign against the climate crisis. DoD is the single largest user of energy probably in the world. It consumes about 1% of all the energy consumed in this country. It consumes 75% of all the energy consumed by the federal government. The next closest agency is the post office, and that's a order of magnitude smaller than DoD's energy consumption. Traditionally, that energy has been largely fuel. And it's still dominated, DoD's consumption is still dominated by fuel, but that is beginning to change. And it's beginning to change because future energy needs are largely electrical. And you can meet those needs in the traditional way with combustion engines, diesel generators, or using advanced energy. And for a variety of reasons, advanced energy solutions, including batteries and advanced storage solutions, meet DoD's needs. Now, those needs vary depending on whether you're talking about the foot soldiers out on patrol, contingency bases, fixed installations like Fort Belvoir near here, manned platforms, unmanned system. There's a variety of different settings, and the needs for batteries and storage vary, but it is a cross-cutting need, and so DoD is active both in the research and development and also as a customer.
David, one thing that kind of picks up on this point of DoD's usage, particularly for bases, they rely on the civilian grid. And what are the implications? As we often think about technology flowing from the military to the civilian application. Maybe there's a kind of a different flow of technology now, but what are the implications for the DoD requirements as we get this increasingly decentralized grid system, which now is potentially less predictable than a more centralized one? You may have a different take on that, but
yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the case. Well, let me reference Dorothy's and Jeff Marcus's report that they did for ITIF, and she can speak in more detail to some of these issues. So one of the things that Dorothy and Jeff do in that report is lay out several different pathways by which technology develops in one sector and moves to the other sector between defense and civilian applications. And one of the well-established pathways is one in which the defense community has a higher value placed on some attribute of a technology. So it might be reliability or resilience in the case of energy, and so therefore they're willing to pay more than civilian users might. And then by providing that early demand, they can help drive down the cost of technology that eventually becomes available to civilians for their needs. So the most famous example of this historically was semiconductor chips.
Yeah.
But where the Department of Defense and NASA together really were the dominant users for a long time, and then prices came down, very radically, and we see the emergence of first computers, and then all kinds of digital devices that we're used to now. And something similar like that could happen with energy technologies, including storage technologies. So where the military bases, the fixed installations that Dorothy talked about, have resilience or reliability needs that are valued more highly than in civilian markets, they may be buying these technologies at prices that civilians wouldn't want to pay, but make sense for the Defense Department. And we've seen some of that going on already, and Dorothy was involved in some of the early projects that established these technologies for defense use.
So let me talk about it in maybe two buckets. One is portable batteries,
Right.
and then stationary storage, which is where fixed installations, fixed military bases like Fort Belvoir come in. For portable batteries, I think DoD can contribute through its research and development. So it is doing research at the cutting edge to try to come up with batteries that will allow foot soldiers to stay out on patrol longer, to carry less weight. Right now, these foot soldiers and small units that are out on patrol, they're at the pointy end of the spear, so to speak, and they are carrying, a typical soldier is carrying, believe it or not, 60, 80, 100 pounds of weight. That's ammunition, water, and batteries. Batteries account for 15 to 20% of that, or 15 to 20 pounds of that weight. And that's because we've gone from a soldier that carries a flashlight and maybe a phone to soldiers that have all kinds of electronic gear that is powered by batteries, and so they cannot get resupplied during a 72-hour mission. The Army wants to expand the length of that mission to 144 hours, so they have to go without battery resupply for that entire time. So getting more powerful batteries that last longer, and also that are safer, because the typical lithium-ion battery, and we've seen some accidents with those, but it's not as safe as you would like in a battlefield environment. It can catch fire, it can explode. So DoD is doing really, I think, quite cutting-edge R&D on better batteries. There's a center at the University of Maryland, Center for Extreme Batteries. There's a number of other centers. It's particularly Army focused, but not just Army. And there's some really interesting developments there. That, by the way, is not the focus of the Department of Energy's battery research. The Department of Energy is doing considerably more, is spending quite a bit more than DoD, as you would imagine, on battery R&D, storage R&D, but it's focused largely, I believe, this was true a couple of years ago, on batteries for electric vehicles and for the grid. It's not focused on the smaller portable batteries for electronic devices. So I think that's an area where DoD can make a contribution in terms of its research and development, and the goals that it is seeking, a more I don't know if the word is power dense or energy dense battery, faster recharge, greater safety. Those are all, that's consistent with what consumers want, but consumers aren't yet willing to pay for it. DoD, as an early customer, as David was saying, will pay more for performance and then drive the cost down as manufacturers come down the cost curve. So I think that's one scenario. I think the scenario with stationary storage, and by the way, DoD also is very interested in portable batteries for electric vehicles as its manned platforms become electrified. Portable batteries become very important there. Stationary storage on military bases are critical because the grid, as you say, DoD relies on the commercial grid. The grid is vulnerable. Largely, it's weather-related events, and military bases tend to be more vulnerable because they're in outlying areas. And so when a grid outage occurs, it takes longer to reconnect the military base. So when I was at the Pentagon 10 years ago, we were really aggressively working to demonstrate some of the very early pre-commercial microgrid technologies that would allow, among other things, allow a military base to island, to disengage from the grid if the grid were to go down, but also to operate in parallel with the grid, and there are some real advantages to that, and incorporate renewable and other forms of distributed energy. But it was all about the energy security. Resilience is the word that's used now, energy resilience of the base. So some of the, a lot of the demonstration of pre-commercial microgrids have been done on military bases. General Electric's commercial microgrid controller went directly from a 3-year test at a Marine Corps base in the Mojave Desert in California to the commercial market. A lot of those demonstrations now incorporate large-scale energy storage, because with storage you have much more flexibility to incorporate renewable energy to interact in parallel with the operation of the grid. Storage gives much greater flexibility. Both microgrids and storage are complex technologies for different reasons, and so the ability for commercial providers to demonstrate them on military bases and then to appeal to DoD as an early customer are tremendously important.
This brings up an issue. We'll get to the supply chain question a little later on, but you're talking about multiple technologies in terms of batteries, which for industry, I'm not sure they can just flip one switch on and flip another on when they're producing a particular type of battery, say for large storage applications and for micro storage, and the whole question of is the industry capable of meeting these multiple demands now? I mean, maybe we're at an early enough stage where that's not an issue, but.
Yeah, so I think we're evolving quickly, but let me just outline a few different categories of storage.
Good.
So batteries are the best known, and particularly lithium-ion batteries are the dominant technology that's used in both electric vehicles and increasingly in grid storage, and of course in electronic devices as well. So this is something that comes in many scales, and you can think of it as a modular technology where what you have in your phone is a very small version of what you would have for a grid where there might be thousands or millions of these cells. So that's the technology we're most familiar with. And then there are other battery chemistries that preceded it, like lead-acid batteries, like you would have in a typical combustion engine, and other kinds of rechargeable or non-rechargeable batteries. And that is something that's proliferating. So there's a lot of research into different kinds of chemistries to substitute materials, and we can talk about the kinds of materials that go into those lithium-ion batteries. So that's one whole classification of storage. Then you have another type of storage which basically relies on gravity. So if we think about what's powering the grid right now, the biggest storage system we have are reservoirs. And so this is called pumped hydro storage, and it's a very simple system. You pump water uphill when you have extra power, and then you flow it downhill. And it works just like any kind of hydro system. But it's a vast capacity, around 20 times as much of that kind of storage capacity in the U.S. grid than we have with batteries right now. The battery piece is growing, but from a very low level. And then the third kind of storage is heat, basically, thermal storage. So you can use ice, which historically was our air conditioning system.
Right.
You go back to the 19th century, anybody who's been to a historic building in Virginia will find they had an ice house. And for the wealthy members of those households, they could get cooled down in the summer when ice was brought in. And modern versions of that are around. And again, for certain kinds of applications, not for electricity, but for building cooling, if you want to get off of dependence on air conditioning, thermal storage, and then there are more advanced applications. So the big thing to say about storage is you have many scales in terms of size, but also duration, and different kinds of technologies are appropriate for different scales. And as this system transformation occurs, I think we're going to need storage technologies at a variety of different scales. And the idea that lithium ion is going to be the silver bullet for all of these, I think, is misguided. And one thing that's happening is we're seeing the emergence of new technologies that can take their place in this system for different purposes.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important point, that you can't bet the farm on one particular technology because things are changing so rapidly. Lithium, in particular, seems to be going through an interesting phase in the minerals market where the prices are dropping because there's so much production.
Well, and it's remarkable. I mean, I don't want to downplay
No.
the tremendous strides that have been made in lithium-ion batteries, particularly cost reduction. So they've come down by roughly a factor of 10 over the last decade. People think about it along the lines that they used to think about semiconductors, this tremendous cost reduction, like as well with solar panels. And one of the big questions in the future is how much of that can be sustained. What will the prices for a given unit of battery storage be 10 years from now? And you can see quite a wide range of estimates at the moment.